Consider the visual bookends of Santiago's journey, that ruined church with a sycamore in the sacristy. He starts there as a shepherd and returns as an alchemist. This anchor proves the physical treasure was always home, but the wisdom required the desert. As the king promised, when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it, even if that means sending you across the world just to bring you back to where you began.
The high performance mandate. Let's strip away the sand, the pyramids, and the romance for a moment and look at the engine running beneath Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. We often mistake this story for a simple fairy tale about a shepherd boy chasing a treasure, but if you look at it through the lens of high performance and psychology, it is actually a blueprint for what we call life-mission alignment. Coelho terms it the personal legend. In the context of elite performance, this isn't just a wish or a hobby, it is a mandate. It is the absolute obligation to align your internal capacity with your external reality. The protagonist, Santiago, begins in a state of comfort. He has his sheep, he has his book, and he has a modest, predictable path. This is the comfort zone, the killer of high performance. The mental model of life-mission alignment dictates that comfort is a signal of stagnation. To achieve the personal legend, one must disrupt the baseline. Santiago has to sell his sheep. He has to abandon the known for the unknown. This is the first principle of the model. The cost of your new life is your old one. You cannot hold on to the safety of the shore if you intend to cross the ocean. Now, consider the counterexample in the book, the crystal merchant. He represents the trap of potentiality. He knows his personal legend, to go to Mecca, but he refuses to execute it. He tells the boy that the dream keeps him alive, and he fears that if he realizes the dream, he will have no reason to go on. This is a critical failure in the mental model. The crystal merchant uses his vision as a sedative, whereas the high performer uses vision as a stimulant. The merchant is misaligned. He wants the feeling of the dream without the friction of the journey. This disconnect creates a low-grade misery, a life of what if, which is the antithesis of the personal legend. The Alchemist teaches us that alignment requires reading the data. In the book, these are called omens. In the modern context, omens are feedback loops. When you are truly locked into your mission, your reticular activating system, the part of your brain that filters information, starts highlighting resources, opportunities, and pathways that were previously invisible. Coelho wraps this psychological phenomenon in a beautiful mystical phrase, and when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. This isn't magic, it is focus. It is the inevitable result of total life mission alignment. When your intention is absolute, the noise fades, and the signal becomes clear. The universe, or rather your perception of reality, reorganizes itself around your goal. However, the path to this alignment is guarded by a specific psychological barrier. Santiago faces it repeatedly. It appears when he is robbed in Tangier, and again when he faces the tribal wars in the desert. It is the paralysis of the unknown. The alchemist, the character, diagnoses this perfectly when he tells the boy, there is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, the fear of failure. Notice the distinction. It isn't the failure itself that stops the mission. It is the fear of it. The high performer understands that failure is just data acquisition. It is a stepping stone, not a tombstone. But the fear? The fear is the wall. To operationalize this mental model, you have to look at the process of alchemy itself. The alchemists in the book are trying to turn lead into gold, but the real transformation isn't metallurgical, it's personal. The lead is your current self, heavy, common, unrefined. The gold is your realized potential. The fire is the struggle. You cannot bypass the fire. Life mission alignment demands that you subject yourself to the heat of the desert, to the risk of the journey, because that is the only way the impurities are burned off.
Santiago eventually reaches the pyramids, but the treasure wasn't there. It was back where he started. This confuses many people, but it is the final piece of the mental model. The mission isn't about the location of the gold. It's about the person you become while looking for it. By the time Santiago returns to the sycamore tree, he is no longer just a shepherd. He is a man who speaks the language of the world, who has turned himself into the wind, who has conquered his fear. He has achieved alignment. So the high-performance mandate is this: identify your personal legend. Recognize that the fear of failure is the only true barrier. Sell your sheep, whatever safety net is holding you back, and commit. Because when you stop treating your life mission as a daydream and start treating it as an architectural blueprint for your existence, that is when the conspiracy of the universe begins. That is when you stop waiting for the future and start building it.
Navigating beginner's luck. Let's look at the architecture of a beginning. Not just the start of a story, but the mechanics of starting a life-altering journey. In Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, we are introduced to a mental model that acts as the ignition switch for destiny. We can call this the momentum catalyst, but in the book, it is identified by the mysterious king of Salem, Melchizedek, as the principle of favorability. We find Santiago, our shepherd boy, at a crossroads. He is comfortable. He has his sheep, he has his wine, and he has a modest, predictable existence in the fields of Andalusia. He even has a romantic interest, a merchant's daughter he plans to see. By all accounts, his life is full, but there is a nagging static in his soul, a recurring dream about a treasure hidden at the Egyptian pyramids. Here is where the mental model comes into play. Most of us stifle these dreams because the inertia of the status quo is too heavy to lift. We need an external force or a sudden stroke of fortune to break the friction of our ordinary lives. Santiago meets the old king in the plaza of Tarifa, and this encounter fundamentally shifts his perception of reality. The king explains that when we first strive for our personal legend, our true purpose, the universe provides an initial boost. It is what we commonly call beginner's luck. But Melchizedek corrects this view. It isn't luck. It is a mechanism of the universe designed to whet your appetite. It is the momentum catalyst. The king tells the boy that there is a force that wants him to realize his destiny, preparing his spirit and his will. It is a seductive force, offering a taste of success early on to ensure the traveler commits to the road. As the king says to Santiago, and when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. This is the golden rule of the momentum catalyst. The universe doesn't conspire to do the work for you. It conspires to help you start. It aligns the initial variables, the sale of the sheep, the wind known as the levanter, the sudden influx of capital to push you out the door. Santiago takes this favorability and creates kinetic energy. He sells his flock, a symbol of his security, and buys a ticket to Africa. He is riding the wave of the catalyst. However, a crucial part of this mental model is understanding that the catalyst is temporary. It is the launch stage of the rocket, not the fuel for the entire trip. When Santiago arrives in Tangier, the principle of favorability seems to vanish abruptly. He is robbed. He is left alone in a foreign land where he doesn't speak the language, with no money and no sheep. A lesser observer might think the universe has changed its mind, or that the omen was false. But this is the trap. The momentum catalyst is designed to get you into the desert, not to carry you across it. The luck runs out precisely when you have gone too far to turn back easily. Santiago sits in the marketplace, weeping, realizing that the narrative has shifted from a fairy tale to a survival story. Yet, because he experienced that initial favorability, he has a memory of the divine connection. He knows it exists. He reframes his situation. He decides he is not a victim of a thief, but an adventurer in quest of his treasure. He realizes it's the possibility of having a dream come true that makes life interesting. This shift in perspective, fueled by the residual heat of the momentum catalyst, propels him into the crystal shop. Here, the mental model matures. Santiago applies the enthusiasm and the luck he felt at the start to the mundane work of cleaning crystal. He realizes that the favorability hasn't left him. It has just changed form. It is no longer free energy. It is potential energy waiting to be unlocked through work. He innovates, suggesting tea be sold in crystal glasses, and the merchant's business booms. This is the momentum catalyst evolving into sustained momentum. Coelho teaches us that beginner's luck is not an accident. It is a strategic gift. It is the universe's way of getting us to sign the contract of our own destiny. The fear of failure is the only thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, but the principle of favorability provides the initial courage to overcome that fear. It shows us what is possible so that when the desert becomes silent and the journey becomes hard, we remember that the universe is listening, waiting for us to prove we are worthy of the treasure we seek. Mastering intuitive intelligence. Welcome back. Today we are stripping away the sand and the wind to look at the machinery beneath Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. We are looking at what Coelho calls the language of the world, but what modern psychology and data science might call high-level pattern recognition. This is the mental model of omens. When we first meet Santiago, he is a shepherd. He knows sheep. He knows that if a specific bird calls, a snake is nearby. He knows the weather by the look of the horizon. This isn't magic, it is data accumulation. He has spent years observing a specific system, the Andalusian fields, and he can predict outcomes based on subtle inputs. But the core tension of the book arises when he is forced to apply this skill to a system he doesn't understand: the human world, commerce, and eventually the vast, silent desert. The turning point for Santiago's intuitive intelligence happens in Tangier. He has been robbed. He is alone. He doesn't speak Arabic. He is entirely outside his dataset. But he lands in a crystal shop. Now watch what happens here. He doesn't succumb to panic. Instead, he observes the patterns of the shop. He notices the dust on the glass. He notices the steep hill outside. He notices that people are thirsty. He connects these disparate data points. Thirst plus hill plus dust equals opportunity. By cleaning the glass, he changes the environment. By selling tea in the crystal, he innovates. This is the language of the world. It is the ability to see the interconnectivity of things. Coelho writes that all things are one, which sounds mystical, but in terms of mental models, it is the realization that systems interact. The economy of the crystal shop is tied to the geography of the hill, which is tied to the thirst of the climber. Santiago succeeds not because he is lucky, but because he learns to read the feedback loops of reality. He calls them omens. You might call them signals. As he moves into the desert, the stakes get higher. The noise decreases and the signal fidelity increases. There is a scene where Santiago watches two hawks fighting in the sky. To a tourist, it's just nature. To Santiago, who has attuned his pattern recognition to the soul of the world, it is a simulation of the immediate future. The aggression of the hawks mirrors the aggression approaching the oasis. He predicts an invasion. This is intuitive intelligence at its peak, processing environmental cues so fast that the logical brain can't keep up, resulting in a hunch. But there is a barrier to this intelligence. The alchemist, the character, warns Santiago about it explicitly. It isn't a lack of skill, it is emotional interference. When we are terrified, we stop reading the patterns. We stop seeing the omens because we are too busy projecting our own anxieties onto the screen of the world. To master the language of the world, one must silence the internal noise to hear the external signal. This is the hardest part of the hero's journey. It requires a radical vulnerability. You have to trust that the data you are receiving from the universe is valid, even when it contradicts your safety protocols. Santiago has to trust his vision of the hawks, even though being wrong means death. He has to trust his love for Fatima, even though logic dictates he should stay and protect his gold. As the alchemist advises him regarding his own internal monologue, tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself, and that no heart has ever suffered when it goes in search of its dreams. That is the crux of the mental model. Fear creates noise. Trust creates clarity. When Santiago finally learns to quiet his fear, the desert stops being a threat and becomes a map. The wind stops being a weather event and becomes a carrier of information. He realizes that intuition isn't a superpower reserved for wizards. It is the natural byproduct of total immersion in the present moment. When you align your internal desires with your external observations, friction disappears. The path forward becomes obvious, illuminated by these so-called omens. It validates the old King Melchizedek's promise from the beginning of the journey. And when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. The conspiracy isn't magic. The conspiracy is alignment. When you are truly paying attention to the patterns of life, you navigate the currents rather than fighting the tide.
You read the world, and in doing so, you write your own legend. The unified field of action. Imagine standing in the vast, open silence of the Sahara. To the untrained eye, it is a landscape of emptiness, a void of sand and wind. But look closer, through the lens of Santiago, the shepherd boy, at the heart of Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. What he sees, and what he eventually learns to manipulate, is not a void, but a dense, vibrating network of cause and effect. This is the mental model of systems thinking applied to the soul. Coelho calls it the soul of the world, but we might also call it the ultimate unified field of action. In a linear mindset, we see life as a series of isolated events. We buy a ticket, we take a trip, we find a job. A leads to B. But the alchemist asks us to adopt a nonlinear, systemic view. In this model, everything is interconnected. The sheep, the crystal merchant, the Englishman, the wind, and the pyramids are not separate entities. They are nodes in a massive, dynamic system. This is the core of interconnectedness. When Santiago learns the language of the world, he is essentially learning to read the data streams of this system, the omens, the signs, the subtle feedback loops that the universe provides to those who are paying attention. Think about the moment Santiago meets the old king, Melchizedek. The king explains that our deepest desires, our personal legends, are not merely private whims. They are originated in the soul of the world. This suggests that individual intent is a crucial input signal for the universal system. It is a profound shift in perspective. You are not a solitary actor pushing against an indifferent reality. You are a component of the reality itself. When you align your personal system, your will, your discipline, your focus, with the larger super system, you unlock a kind of momentum that feels like magic. As the old king tells the boy, and when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. That is the golden rule of this mental model. The conspiracy of the universe is actually the system self-organizing around a strong, coherent signal. But systems thinking also teaches us about resistance and homeostasis. Systems like to stay the same. They resist change. In the book, we see this resistance manifested as fear. The crystal merchant represents a system trapped in stasis. He knows what he wants, to go to Mecca, but he refuses to introduce that input into his life because he fears it will destabilize his current existence. He prefers the dream to the reality. Santiago faces this same systemic resistance. His heart, which acts as his internal compass or feedback mechanism, begins to panic as he gets closer to the treasure. It shows him images of failure, of loss, of the comfort of the known versus the danger of the unknown. This is the system trying to maintain its previous state. The alchemist teaches the boy that he must override this feedback loop with a higher understanding. He has to reframe the data. The fear isn't a stop sign, it's a sign that the stakes have been raised. The boy has to learn to communicate with his own internal system before he can master the external one. He learns a vital lesson in emotional regulation. Tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself. By acknowledging the fear without yielding to it, he integrates the emotion into his system rather than letting it block his output. The climax of this systems thinking approach occurs when Santiago must turn himself into the wind. It sounds impossible, a fantastical miracle, but look at how he achieves it. He doesn't cast a spell. He enters into a dialogue. He speaks to the desert, then the wind, then the sun, and finally the hand that wrote all. He navigates the hierarchy of the system. He realizes that the desert is made of the same atomic and spiritual stuff as he is. The wind breathes the same air. The sun fuels the same life.
There is no separation. All things are one. By understanding the deep interconnectivity of these elements, he realizes that his consciousness is not a closed loop. It is permeable. He can merge his intent with the wind because at the fundamental level of the soul of the world, he is the wind. This teaches us that true alchemy isn't about changing lead into gold in a laboratory. It is about understanding the properties of the system so profoundly that you can catalyze transformation. The lead represents potential. The gold represents the realized state. The Alchemist shows us that we are all walking through a world of potential, surrounded by a language we have forgotten how to speak. We get lost in the noise of the parts, the wars, the thieves, the hunger, and miss the signal of the whole. To apply this mental model to our own lives, we must stop looking at our obstacles as random bad luck. We must see them as feedback. If the universe conspires to help us, it also conspires to test us, to ensure that the vessel is ready to hold the treasure. We must look for the interconnections in our daily lives. How does your attitude affect your environment? How does the environment feed back into your attitude? Are you like the crystal merchant, preserving a fragile stability? Or are you like Santiago, willing to disrupt the system to achieve a higher order of complexity and fulfillment? The soul of the world is waiting for your input. It is a unified field of action, responsive, alive, and inextricably linked to your own heart. When you understand that you are not separate from the system, but a vital, driving force within it, the fear of failure dissolves, replaced by the exhilarating realization that you are co-creating reality with every step you take.
Balancing destiny and agency. There is a specific, resonant tension that vibrates through the pages of Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, a philosophical tug-of-war that every one of us has felt in the quiet moments of our own lives. It is the tension between the Arabic concept of maktub, meaning it is written, and the undeniable driving force of human agency. How do we reconcile the idea that our path is already laid out by the hand of God with the necessity of making difficult, life-altering choices? To understand this, we have to look through the lens of a powerful mental model known as radical acceptance, or what the Stoics called amor fati, the love of one's fate. When we first meet Santiago, he is defined by his agency. He defies his parents' wishes to become a priest, choosing instead the dusty, uncertain life of a shepherd because he wants to see the world. He is the architect of his own destiny. But the universe has a way of shattering our carefully constructed plans to see what remains in the rubble. And this happens to Santiago the moment he arrives in Tangier. In a heartbreaking instant, he is robbed of all his money by a thief he trusted. He is stranded in a strange land, unable to speak the language, with nothing but his book and 2 stones. This is the crucible of radical acceptance. Most of us, when faced with such a catastrophic setback, retreat into victimhood. We blame the thief, we blame the universe, we blame our own stupidity. We reject the reality of the present moment because it is painful. Santiago initially falls into this trap, weeping for his lost sheep and his shattered dream. But then a shift occurs, a cognitive reframe that is the essence of amor fati. He realizes that while he cannot change the fact that he has been robbed, he has absolute control over how he frames the narrative. He decides, in a moment of crystalline clarity, that he is not a victim of a thief. He is an adventurer in quest of his treasure. The robbery was not a deviation from the path. It was the path. This is where the concept of maktub stops being about passive fatalism and starts being about active trust. If it is written, then even the thief was written, even the hunger was written. By accepting the present circumstances radically, without judgment or resentment, Santiago frees up the mental energy he would have wasted on complaining and uses it to find a solution. He finds work with the crystal merchant. He doesn't just survive, he innovates, building a display case and serving tea in crystal glasses, eventually making more money than he ever had before. This brings us to the internal battle Santiago fights, not with bandits, but with his own anatomy. As he crosses the desert, terrified of the tribal wars and the uncertainty of the future, he begins to argue with his own heart. His heart is agitated, fearful, and urges him to stop. It is the universal human condition. We crave the treasure, but we are paralyzed by the risk of the journey. The alchemist, serving as his mentor, gives him the antidote to this paralysis, a piece of advice that serves as the bedrock of emotional resilience. He advises the boy to speak directly to his fear. He says, "Tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself, and that no heart has ever suffered when it goes in search of its dreams, because every second of the search is a second's encounter with God and with eternity." That distinction between the fear of suffering and the suffering itself is crucial. Radical acceptance acknowledges that the desert is hot and the journey is long. That is suffering, but anxiety is the fear of that heat, the fear of the length. By accepting the reality of the desert, the suffering becomes manageable, even meaningful. By resisting it, by wishing the desert were a meadow, we create anxiety.
Ultimately, the alchemist argues that these two opposing forces, destiny and agency, are actually collaborators. You must take action. You must sell the sheep. You must cross the sands. You must dig at the foot of the pyramids. You must exercise your will. But you must do so with the underlying faith that the outcome, whatever it may be, is part of a larger, benevolent orchestration. When you align your will with the nature of reality, you stop swimming upstream. You realize that the currents of life, even the turbulent ones, are carrying you exactly where you need to go. It is the ultimate validation of agency within destiny. And when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. The conspiracy of the universe isn't always positive in the short term. Sometimes the universe conspires to rob you in Tangier so you can learn the crystal business. Sometimes it conspires to send a sandstorm so you can learn to speak to the wind. But if you practice radical acceptance, if you embrace the maktub of the moment, you realize that the conspiracy is always, ultimately, in your favor. Conquering the fear of success. We often imagine that the hero's journey ends with a climactic battle against a dragon or a dark sorcerer. But in Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, specifically in the author's introductory insights regarding the fourth obstacle, we learn that the final enemy is far more insidious. It is not an external monster, but an internal mechanism. It is the fear of realizing the dream for which we have fought all our lives. This is the ultimate form of self-sabotage. Let's analyze this through the mental model of the fear of success. It sounds paradoxical. We strive for success, so why would we fear it? Coelho explains that as we inch closer to our personal legend, a heavy guilt descends. We look around and see so many others who failed to achieve their desires. We begin to ask, why me? Why do I deserve this happiness when others suffer? This guilt creates what Coelho describes as a saintly aura around renouncing the conquest. We convince ourselves that there is nobility in sacrifice, in stopping just short of the finish line. We begin to make small, seemingly accidental mistakes. We procrastinate. We lose focus. We sabotage the victory right when it is within our grasp. The most poignant case study of this mental block in the book is the crystal merchant. Santiago, the protagonist, works for this man for a year. The merchant is not a villain. He is a man paralyzed by the fourth obstacle. His personal legend is clear. He is required by his faith to visit the holy city of Mecca. He has accumulated the wealth to do it. He has hired Santiago to boost his business, giving him the freedom to leave. Yet he stays. Why? The merchant confesses a terrifying truth to the boy. He says, "It's the thought of Mecca that keeps me alive. That's what helps me face these days that are all the same. I'm afraid that if my dream is realized, I'll have no reason to go on living." Here we see the anatomy of self-sabotage. The merchant has constructed his entire identity around longing for the dream, rather than living it. The dream serves as a psychological crutch, a safe place to retreat to when reality is mundane. If he were to actually achieve the dream, he fears the crutch would disappear, leaving him with a void. He prefers the safety of the unfulfilled wish to the vulnerability of the fulfilled reality. He embodies the stagnation that occurs when we value the idea of a thing more than the thing itself. Santiago, conversely, represents the breaking of this pattern. He too is tempted by the comfortable life of the oasis and the love of Fatima. He could have stopped there, satisfied with being a counselor of the oasis, rich and in love. But he understands a fundamental truth that the merchant denies. It's the possibility of having a dream come true that makes life interesting. Not the having of the dream, but the realization of it. To conquer this fear of success, one must fundamentally shift their understanding of suffering and worthiness. The crystal merchant avoids action because he fears the disappointment might be greater than the hope. He chooses a dull, chronic ache over acute risk. But the alchemist teaches us to engage with our fear directly. As the boy learns to listen to his own heart during the treacherous desert crossing, he receives a crucial piece of advice.
Tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself. The merchant's suffering is passive. It rots the soul. The suffering of the journey, the heat of the desert, the threat of tribal wars, is active. It leads to transformation. When we succumb to the fear of success, we are choosing the merchant's path. We are choosing to be defined by what we lack. Coelho argues that we must understand that our happiness does not deprive others. In fact, the pursuit of the personal legend is the very mechanism by which the universe evolves.
Lead evolves into gold. A shepherd evolves into an alchemist. Stagnation is unnatural. The universe desires our success. As the old King Melchizedek tells Santiago at the very beginning of his journey, "And when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it." Note that the universe conspires to help you achieve it, not just to help you dream about it. The conspiracy is toward motion, toward completion. The crystal merchant ignored this conspiracy. He fought against the river of his own destiny, anchoring himself in Tangier, surrounded by fragile glass, protecting a fragile dream. So, when you find yourself hesitating at the threshold of a major life achievement, remember the fourth obstacle. Ask yourself, am I playing the role of the crystal merchant? Am I afraid that my life will lose meaning if I actually get what I want? Recognize that this fear is the final test. It is the ego trying to preserve the status quo. Break the glass. Take the ticket to Mecca. Do not let the saintly aura of self-denial keep you from your treasure, because the universe did not conspire this hard just to watch you stop one step away from the pyramids. Self-alchemy through action. Welcome back to our deep dive into the mental models of Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. Today, we are stripping away the mystical veil to look at the practical engine that drives personal transformation. We are looking at the chapter of your life where you stop planning and start doing. We call this the master work, self-alchemy through action. Consider the two travelers crossing the Sahara in Coelho's narrative. On one camel, you have the Englishman. He is surrounded by luggage, but his most heavy burden is his library. He has spent years studying the history of alchemy, memorizing the codes, analyzing the emerald tablet, and reading the biographies of the great masters. He knows the theory of turning lead into gold better than anyone, yet he has never done it. He is searching for the alchemist to give him the final secret, the missing variable in his equation. On the camel next to him is Santiago, the shepherd boy. He has sold his sheep, crossed a sea, been robbed, and worked for a year in a crystal shop. He carries no library. He observes the desert. He watches how the camel driver reacts to the threat of tribal wars. He listens to the wind. This presents us with our core mental model, the disconnect between intellectual accumulation and experiential learning. The Englishman represents the trap of preparation procrastination. We often believe that if we just read one more book, take one more course, or buy one more piece of software, we will be ready to pursue our personal legend. We treat our dreams as academic subjects to be studied, rather than realities to be lived. The Englishman is frustrated because the alchemist refuses to hand him the answer. Instead, the alchemist asks him, "Have you ever tried to turn lead into gold?" When the Englishman admits he hasn't, the alchemist's advice is devastatingly simple: go and try. That is the crux of experiential learning. Theory is safe, theory is clean. But alchemy, real change, is messy. It happens in the furnace. Conversely, Santiago embodies the mental model of action as information. By working in the crystal shop, he didn't just earn money, he learned the language of business, the rhythms of human desire, and the importance of innovation. He learned that he could affect change in his environment. He didn't study the language of the world in a textbook, he absorbed it by engaging with the world. When they finally reach the oasis, the difference becomes stark. The Englishman is looking for a specific man to give him a specific instruction. Santiago, however, is looking at the hawks in the sky. Because he has engaged with the desert, he can read the omen of the fighting hawks. He predicts an attack on the oasis. He saves lives not because he read a strategy guide, but because he was immersed in the reality of the present moment. The alchemist eventually tells the boy, "There is only one way to learn. It's through action. Everything you need to know you have learned through your journey." This challenges us to look at our own endeavors. Where are we acting like the Englishman? Where are we hoarding knowledge as a defense mechanism against the risk of application? The gap between the Englishman and the master work wasn't a lack of knowledge, it was a lack of courage to apply that knowledge.
The narrative reveals a profound truth about high performance and self-actualization. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. The Englishman feared failing the experiment, so he never started the fire. He preferred the safety of potential success over the risk of actual failure. Santiago, however, risked his life speaking to the tribal chieftains about his vision. He risked his savings to travel to Egypt. In doing so, he engaged the feedback loop of the universe. When you act, reality pushes back. That resistance is what refines you.
That is the fire that turns your leaden self into gold. You cannot optimize a theoretical path. You can only steer a moving ship. So the mental model for this chapter of your life is simple. Put down the manual. Light the furnace. The universe cannot help you steer if you are standing still. You must move. You must try. And you must risk the failure that the Englishman so dreaded. Only through the friction of doing does the sulfur burn away, leaving you with the gold of wisdom. The biology of persistence. Welcome back to our deep dive into the psychology of narrative. Today, we are dissecting the most critical phase of Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, a phase I like to call the darkest hour, the biology of persistence. We are going to look at the specific mental model known as the threshold of greatness. This is that razor-thin line between absolute ruin and the realization of a personal legend. Now, biologically speaking, human beings are designed for efficiency. Our brains are wired to seek rewards and avoid pain. When Santiago, our shepherd boy, first starts his journey, he experiences what the old King Melchizedek calls beginner's luck. This is the principle of favorability. Neurologically, this is a dopamine spike. The universe gives you a taste of success to hook you on the journey. It feels good. It feels destined. But biology dictates that dopamine is a finite resource. As the journey lengthens, the novelty wears off and the beginner's luck evaporates. This is where the real work begins and where the threshold of greatness appears. We see this most vividly when the boy and the alchemist are captured by the tribesmen. The situation is dire. They are surrounded by death. The alchemist, in a move that seems insane to the preservation-focused mind, bets the boy's life on a miracle. He tells the warlord that the boy can transform himself into the wind. Santiago is terrified. He has no idea how to do this. His cortisol levels are spiking. His fight or flight response is screaming at him to flee. This is the biological barrier to greatness. Your body wants safety, but your soul demands evolution. Coelho writes a pivotal interaction here. The boy is paralyzed by the stakes. He looks at the desert, the sun, and the wind, believing he is too small, too insignificant to command the elements. But the alchemist cuts through this biological panic with a single, piercing truth. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. Notice the distinction. It isn't the failure that stops us, it is the fear of it. The fear is the biological warning system gone wrong. To cross the threshold of greatness, Santiago has to override his evolutionary programming. He has to stop protecting his physical self and engage with the soul of the world. He has to realize that his existence and the wind's existence are not separate. By suppressing the fear of failure, he unlocks a capability he didn't know he had. He becomes the wind not by learning a technique, but by surrendering the ego that is afraid of dying. But the test isn't over. The biology of persistence suggests that the hardest blow comes when you are closest to the reward. Let's fast forward to the very end. Santiago reaches the pyramids. He has survived wars, loss, and the desert. He falls to his knees and weeps. He starts digging. This is the moment of expected victory. And what happens? He finds nothing. Instead, he is brutally beaten by refugees from the tribal wars. He is bleeding, broken, and nearly dead. This is the darkest hour. This is the threshold. If Santiago had been driven only by greed, he would have died there. If he had been driven only by logic, he would have quit hours ago. But he remembers the advice of the alchemist. He remembers the internal dialogue he had with his own heart during those long nights on the camel. He remembers the lesson.
tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself. At the pyramids, Santiago is suffering, yes, but he is no longer afraid of the suffering. He has accepted it as the cost of his legend. And because he persists through this physical trauma, because he stays conscious just long enough to speak the truth to his attackers, the final key is revealed.
The leader of the refugees, mocking him, tells a story of his own dream, a dream of a treasure buried in a ruined church in Spain, right where Santiago started. This is the mental model in action. The universe requires you to be emptied out before you can be filled. The threshold of greatness acts as a filter. It filters out those who only want the reward from those who are willing to become the person required to hold the reward. Santiago had to travel all the way to Egypt, face death, and lose everything, just to be told that the treasure was at his feet the whole time. Was the journey wasted? Absolutely not. The Santiago who left Spain was a boy. The Santiago who returned was an alchemist. He needed the biology of persistence to break him down so the world could rebuild him. He learned that the treasure wasn't the gold. The treasure was the capacity to commune with the universe to get the gold. That is the threshold, and you only cross it when you refuse to let the fear of suffering dictate your actions. Wisdom's final warning. It is strange, is it not? To travel thousands of miles, to cross sands that shift like the tides of the sea, only to find myself back where I started. Here, beneath the broken roof of this abandoned church, where the sycamore grows in the sacristy. The alchemist warned me. He said every search begins with beginner's luck, but ends with the victor being severely tested. Those men at the pyramids, they nearly killed me. But in their cruelty, they gave me the final piece of the map. The leader called me a fool for crossing a desert based on a dream. He told me of his dream, a treasure buried under a sycamore in Spain. He had the map, but he lacked the courage to follow the omens. He didn't understand the old king's secret. He didn't know that when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it, even if the universe has to use the words of a thief to point the way home. It was here all along. True, but if I had stayed, I would never have seen the pyramids. I wouldn't have learned the language of the world. I wouldn't have met the crystal merchant or the alchemist. I wouldn't have looked into the eyes of a woman at the oasis and understood that one is loved because one is loved. No reason is needed for loving. I know this wind. It isn't the smell of the desert or the threat of invasion. It is her, a kiss, traveling slowly, slowly from the oasis to Spain. You made me wait, Fatima, but I have the treasure now, and I am coming.